Good evening, I'm James Izimoha and you're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. President Trump signals progress on Gaza ceasefire during his meeting with Netanyahu. U.S. will resume weapons shipments to Ukraine just days after halting military key support. Europe's largest port, Rotterdam, prepares for possible conflict with Russia, according to reports. President Donald Trump says a Gaza ceasefire is within reach as he prepares for a second round of talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Trump says the focus is on securing a hostage deal with Hamas in exchange for a 60-day truce. Obi Shabanda has more from Washington.
Calling Gaza a tragedy that needs to be solved, President Donald Trump said that his second meeting with Israeli Prime Minister on Tuesday evening will focus on efforts to reach a Gaza ceasefire and hopefully finalize a hostage deal. The meeting seems to reflect optimism that a deal between Israel and Hamas could be near. In return for the hostages still held by Hamas militants, Israel would reportedly commit to a 60-day truce in Gaza. Hamas militants still hold 20 Israeli hostages who are still alive, and they're holding the bodies of many more hostages who have been killed. On Monday, President Trump said that following his talks at the White House with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that he believes that Hamas and Israel, quote, want to have that ceasefire in Gaza. Trump has been pressuring both Israel and Hamas through Qatari and Egyptian mediators to agree to a deal. White House envoy Steve Witkoff is expected to travel to Doha this week to join the talks and try to seal the deal, according to the White House. Quote, we have an opportunity to finally get a peace deal. That's according to Steve Witkoff in remarks to the press following Trump's meeting on Monday with the Israeli Prime Minister. President Trump has also said that the U.S. will soon hold talks with Iran to try and achieve a nuclear deal following that 12-day war between Israel and Iran. According to Axios, Netanyahu's senior advisor, Ron Dermer, has told officials in closed briefings that he believes that the Trump administration could back new Israeli strikes on Iran and its underground nuclear program under specific circumstances. I'm Ube Shabander for A News, Washington, D.C.
Donald Trump says the U.S. will resume weapons shipments to Ukraine just days after halting key military support. The move follows intense Russian airstrikes and growing pressure from Kyiv.
South Korea, Japan should take it.
Under pressure from a worsening battlefield and after deadly Russian attacks, Donald Trump has reversed his stance, confirming the U.S. will send more weapons to Ukraine.
On Ukraine, Mr. President, are you planning to send more weapons to Ukraine?
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now. They're getting hit very hard. We're going to have to send more weapons. Yeah, defensive weapons primarily, but they're getting hit very, very hard. It's very sad. So many people are dying in that mess.
The announcement came days after relentless Russian drone and missile strikes, including on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, and record number of drones launched. In Kharkiv and Zaporizhia, military recruitment officers were hit, injuring dozens.
Пикирование. Ну, это звук, который вообще ни с кем не сравнишь и никогда не забудешь, наверное, в своей жизни.
The drone dived in and it made an incomparable sound you will never forget. We couldn't understand what was happening. Everything was blown out, the windows burst, and so did the chandeliers.
Везде окна, упали люстры.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky had pleaded for support after Washington paused delivery of Patriot missiles and artillery shells. He says he and Trump have now agreed to work together on strengthening air defenses. The Pentagon confirmed it will send additional defensive aid as ceasefire talks remain stalled. The war has now entered its fourth year, and Ukraine's survival remains tied to international backing. With Trump now shifting gears, Kyiv may find relief, but the front lines remain under fire.
Let's talk to Dr. Maria Dimitrenko, medical doctor and president of the Ukrainian Congress Committee, Illinois Division, about President Donald Trump's frustration with Russian President Vladimir Putin over stalled negotiations and the intended resumption of military aid to Ukraine. Now, President Zelensky has called Patriot air defense systems the real protectors of life. What does this recent decision to resume arms deliveries mean for Kyiv?
Thank you for having me. Absolutely, Patriot missiles do save lives. That is unequivocal. There's no analogy to US-made defense systems. That being said, this is also a test on is cooperation between US and Ukraine is going to stand, how much Russian interference is going to make a difference, because this is also Putin's test. Look, he had attacked Ukraine viciously over 4th of July. That is when US is prevailing with the news of United States celebrating 4th of July, one of the biggest federal holidays. So Putin is testing the ground to see how much American public, how much American politicians are going to take without responding harshly. And so US now resuming supply of the weapons and air defense is actually responding to that test.
Now, will President Trump adopt a strategy of response escalation, which is to say, stepping up military aid when under attack and reducing it during periods of calm? And what is the rationale behind such an approach?
A lot of people, a lot of analytics are wondering what is in President Trump's head, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that we know for sure is that Americans, vast majority of Americans do support Ukraine. Right now in US Senate, there is a bill on Russian sanctions. 84 US senators co-signed it. That is bipartisan. So I think a lot of pressure to President Trump to continue, protect, defend, and supply Ukraine with weapons is coming from his own Republican Party, from his generals. Again, I cannot comment why exactly he's protracting this aid. Maybe Russian propaganda and what Russian sources of information are telling him, but every day that aid is delayed and the war is protracted is a win for Putin. Because Putin is definitely building his army, bringing North Korea in. 30,000 troops of North Koreans being added to the battlefield right now. So Americans do understand it. Americans will keep talking to President Trump. We hope this is going to happen rather sooner than later, that this is going to be very crystal clear that the United States has to take stand in this war, and it has to stand with Ukraine because Russia and North Korea and Iran are adversaries.
Well, thank you very much for your time and insight.
Thank you for having me.
The U.S. is raising tariffs on key trade partners. President Trump has announced new 25% duties on all imports from Japan and South Korea, set to begin on the 1st of August. The White House says the tariffs aim to secure fairer trade deals, with President Trump sending letters to Japan and South Korea warning of further duties. 12 more nations are set to receive similar notices. Trump extended the tariff deadline from the 9th of July to the 1st of August. Markets reacted, with Japanese car stocks falling as trade talks with other nations continue.
I have the signed letters that went out to both South Korea and Japan today, and there will be approximately 12 other countries that will receive notifications and letters directly from the President of the United States. I want to go back to the trade deals. As you see, we have these beautiful letters that the President has signed. This one is to the President of the Republic of Korea, original signature on that, and these will be mailed. And then here we also have another letter to the Prime Minister of Japan as well. Both countries will be receiving a 25% tariff rate effective on August 1st.
Asia is pushing back against new U.S. tariff threats, with China warning of retaliation and Japan and South Korea intensifying trade talks to avoid steep import duties set to begin on the 1st of August.
14 nations have been targeted in President Donald Trump's latest tariff threat, including Japan and South Korea. He warned they could face duties of up to 40% starting on the 1st of August unless they accept more US exports and shift manufacturing to the United States. China warns the US against reimposing tariffs next month and vowed to retaliate against countries that join supply chain deals with Washington at Beijing's expense. Beijing called the tax hikes bullying and urged dialogue as the only path to a lasting trade deal, insisting it won't compromise core interests or accept exclusion from regional supply chains. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba says that trade talks with the US are ongoing.
We have made some progress through repeated dialogue with the US side. As a result, the letter at this time leaves the tariff rate effectively unchanged, rather than the 30 or 35% recently conveyed by President Trump, and extends the deadline for negotiations.
Meanwhile, South Korea said Tuesday it would intensify trade talks with the US, viewing Trump's tariff plan as a de facto extension of the deadline.
We have secured additional time through the extension of the tariff deadline. During this period, we aim to swiftly reduce uncertainties caused by the tariffs and work toward a resolution that best serves our national interest through various diplomatic channels, including a possible summit meeting.
Trade tariff and hikes and supply chain negotiations continue to shape US-Asia economic relations amid ongoing rising trade tensions and continued diplomatic efforts.
In Brazil, President Lula has criticized President Trump's social media threats to impose tariffs on BRICS countries, calling the move irresponsible. Lula added that the group doesn't want to affront anyone, but other nations have the right to reciprocate. It follows Trump's announcement on his Truth Social platform that the US would impose an additional 10% tariff on countries aligned with the so-called anti-American policies of the BRICS group.
We don't want an emperor. Our countries are sovereign. If Trump issues tariffs, other countries have the right to do the same. There is the reciprocity law. I think it's not responsible for a president from a country like the US to threaten the world with tariffs on social media. Honestly, there are other forums for the president of a country the size of the United States to talk to other countries.
Germany's export sector saw a steeper than expected decline in May. Official data shows the drop was driven by falling demand from the United States for the second month in a row.
German exports have fallen for the second consecutive month. It's after a period of strong purchases in anticipation of US tariffs. But according to the Federal Statistics Office, exports dropped by 1.4% in May compared to the previous month. It's more than was expected. Exports to European Union countries also dropped by 2.2%, while sales to non-EU markets saw a more modest decline of 0.3%. Experts say that a recovery within the EU remains vital for stabilising German exports. The latest figures also show that trade with the United States fell significantly, with exports falling by 7.7%, despite the country being Germany's largest trading partner last year. And trade to China also declined by 2.9%. Meanwhile, imports were down more steeply, falling 3.8% in the same month. Despite the slump, the country recorded a foreign trade surplus of 18.4 billion euros in May. That's an increase from April's figure, which was 15.7 billion euros. The EU and other partners have until Wednesday to finalise trade agreements and avoid severe tariffs. The European Commission say that efforts are ongoing, with hopes for a breakthrough this week. It's after what was described as a good exchange between Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. With bilateral trade between Germany and the US reaching 253 billion euros last year, any imposition of tariffs would have serious implications for Europe's largest economy.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen is facing a no-confidence vote this week. The move was initiated by Romanian MEP Gheorghe Pipera, who raised concerns over undisclosed text messages exchanged with the pharmaceutical CEO during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Romanian member of the European Parliament Gheorghe Pipera has gathered 72 signatures to trigger a no-confidence vote against European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen this week. By doing so, Pipera made von der Leyen the first Commission President in more than a decade to face such a censure. "I have succeeded in opening a Pandora's box," the Romanian lawyer told The Telegraph, predicting her days are numbered.
Thank you.
The motion centres on undisclosed text exchanges between von der Leyen and Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla, linked to the EU's €35 billion COVID-19 vaccine deal, a controversy dubbed Pfizergate. An EU court ruled in May that the Commission wrongly blocked access to these messages, fueling criticism over transparency. The vote, scheduled for Thursday in Strasbourg, comes amid months of accusations that von der Leyen bypassed parliamentary oversight on major initiatives, including a €150 billion defence loan programme. Pipera, who joined the European Parliament last year, accuses her of breaking the rule of law by sidelining member states and members of the European Parliament. Although the motion is unlikely to pass due to strong pro-EU party support, Pipera calls it the beginning of the end and predicts she could resign by October amid rising dissent within her own European People's Party. Ahead of the debate, von der Leyen appeared with all 26 EU commissioners to show unity, sending a clear message. A vote against her could bring down the entire Commission and plunge the EU into a major institutional crisis during ongoing trade talks with the US and conflict in Eastern Europe. Her key ally, EPP leader Manfred Weber, warned against falling into the trap of this motion, which was set up by the pro-Putin fringes in the European Parliament, urging unity to avoid destabilising the EU, especially as von der Leyen negotiates a trade deal impacting 450 million Europeans. Von der Leyen defended her actions in Parliament, saying, "It is no secret that I was in contact with leading vaccine producers and consulted top epidemiologists and virologists to overcome the crisis." Critics, however, argue the secrecy undermines trust in the Commission's transparency and accountability. This controversy reflects deeper issues within the EU's complex system, described by some as a constitutional Frankenstein. Power is split between the European Commission in Brussels and the 27 member states, with multiple bodies like the European Council and the Council of the European Union, each playing different roles. Adding to the complexity, 20 countries use the euro while 7 maintain their own currencies, leaving many Europeans confused. Surveys show nearly half of EU citizens struggle to understand how the institutions work, contributing to slow decision-making and fragmented foreign policy. The historian Brendan Sims, head of Cambridge University's Centre for Geopolitics, has proposed remaking the EU on Anglo-American constitutional principles. He envisions a United States of Europe with a president elected by universal suffrage. Europe has had opportunities to form such a federation before. After World War II, 6 countries attempted to create a European political community with a common parliament and army, but French concerns over sovereignty halted the project. Again in 1993, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl pushed for a United States of Europe, but French opposition led the EU to remain primarily an economic union with limited political power. Kohl warned this arrangement might not last. As the EU faces both internal and external challenges, the debate over its future is more relevant than ever.
Let's talk to Antonio Nuggera later, Chair Professor at Nova SBE, about the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the no confidence vote triggered by MEP Gheorghe Pipera. Now, how serious is President von der Leyen's predicament? While the support of mainstream pro-EU factions may well save the next vote, critics such as Pipera insist that this marks the beginning of her political demise.
Well, thank you. I don't think so. I think that President von der Leyen has very strong support from the main parties, not just the EPP, but also to some extent the Greens and the Social Democrats. Even the RP is split in terms of support. So I think that it may not be a problem specifically for Mrs. von der Leyen. Also because this is coming from people very much on the right, which were very critical of the policy of the EU and its governments, member state governments vis-à-vis the COVID epidemic, and very peculiar positions on a matter of issues which are not common sense within the major European parties. Having said that, that does not mean that I do not find that there probably is the time to start thinking about improving the architecture of the EU. The last big revision happened in the Treaty of Lisbon, 2008. The world is completely different from what it was at the time, and the challenges in Europe, as you have in your piece, are of paramount importance in a very changed world. And so probably after the French election, there will be conditions for rethinking some of the institutions and the way Europe works to face more effectively, not just foreign competition, but also the war in the eastern flank, and a lot of other challenges that are really creating a series of very significant problems to Europe's unity and also to the well-being of its citizens and the growth of its economy.
Now, finally, because we're short on time, the no confidence motion is rooted in controversy surrounding text messages exchanged between von der Leyen and pharmaceutical executives during the pandemic. What is it about these messages that threatens to unseat the Commission president?
Well, mostly, as far as I understand from the references that were made public and the arguments of the different political parties within the European Parliament, is essentially, in my view, a lack of transparency, which we have to understand is magnified by the fact that the Commission is not directly elected by the Europeans. The President of the Commission is, it's elected by the Parliament, but on an arrangement of the major party, and therefore that is done by the Commission that is not transparent enough will create opportunities for people within the Parliament to come against the Commission and especially its leader, Mrs. von der Leyen. So I don't think that this is a fatal blow on Mrs. von der Leyen. I don't believe in this October deadline, but the fact is the Commission needs to be very transparent because its political legitimacy is always hampered by the fact that they are, as the President of the Council, they are an arrangement among European politicians. They do not have the legitimacy of the direct vote of the people. And that is being used now at a time where the political infighting is much more relevant than what we have seen in previous, more calm period.
Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Time now to hear from our correspondent, Anita Sharma, with the latest updates on the key developments shaping the European continent.
Hello, and welcome to This Day from Europe, where we bring you the continent's key developments. We are focusing on the port of Rotterdam in the Netherlands as officials prepare for a potential war with Russia. Transatlantic trade tensions are also in the spotlight as the U.S. slaps fresh tariffs on EU exports. We will also look at Poland's unilateral border checks and how that may threaten the integrity of the Schengen area. Let's begin with the port of Rotterdam. It is Europe's largest seaport, and it seems quietly transforming into a strategic military logistics hub. Amid heightened tensions between NATO and Russia, Dutch authorities say they are fast-tracking defense contingency plans very reminiscent of Cold War-era readiness. Recently, Dutch military planners, in coordination with NATO command, carried out infrastructure stress tests, rehearsed troop and armor movements, and reviewed how the port of Rotterdam, as well as its neighbor, the port of Antwerp, would handle large-scale reinforcements in the event of a war in Eastern Europe. Rotterdam is a NATO military mobility priority zone and part of a broader EU strategy to ensure that troops and equipment can move swiftly from Western to Eastern Europe if necessary. The logistical planning includes rerouting commercial traffic, securing fuel depots, and expanding cyber defenses to shield critical infrastructure. The Port of Rotterdam Authority told the Financial Times it is working with Antwerp on how to navigate the waters should supplies arrive from countries like the U.S., Canada, and Great Britain. This follows a call late last year from Admiral Rob Bauer in Brussels when he was the chair of NATO's military committee. He urged businesses to be prepared for a wartime scenario and adjust their production and distribution lines accordingly to be less vulnerable to blackmail from countries such as Russia and China. This is also in line with the takeaways of the NATO summit in The Hague last month, where NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned that Russia could attack one of the NATO members by 2030. Admiral Bauer says a key part of the region's deterrence relies on ensuring that all crucial services and goods can be delivered no matter what. This shift marks a deeper integration of civilian ports into NATO deterrence planning, especially as Russia's war in Ukraine drags on and concerns grow over potential future flashpoint in the Baltics. Well, the EU is also looking with great caution to the U.S., with trade tensions still high between Brussels and Washington. Sources say a preliminary agreement could be reached Wednesday, with tariffs implemented by the 1st of August. That would be the new deadline set by U.S. President Trump before any additional tariffs come into play if there's no deal. A member of the European Parliament told reporters that the U.S. will not drop the baseline tariffs because they're, quote, a revenue source. So the EU is trying to get exemptions from a baseline 10% tariff in what it regards to be strategic sectors. The U.S. administration is seeking more tariffs on key European exports, citing unfair subsidies as a key reason. If no deal is reached, the European Commission is also considering reciprocal tariffs on American tech as well as automotive goods. Behind the scenes, however, diplomats are scrambling right now to avoid a full-scale trade war. There's no doubt protectionist rhetoric is gaining ground as businesses on both continents brace for a rougher ride ahead. Finally, we look at Poland's border checks and how this practice raises questions about the strength and future of the Schengen Agreement. Poland reintroduced unilateral border checks with Lithuania and Germany, citing migration and security concerns. It follows a similar move made by Berlin. The measure was initiated by Poland's conservative opposition party, but it is now partly backed by the new centrist government. This has triggered legal warnings from the European Commission, with critics arguing it violates the core principles of the Schengen Agreement, which allows passport-free travel across 27 European countries. Local authorities in affected regions are reporting delays, economic losses, and growing frustration. Haulers are warning of backlogs at freight crossings, while civil society groups call it a political stunt that undermines EU unity. The Polish Interior Ministry defends the checks as, quote, temporary and necessary. But with 8 countries, including Germany, Austria, and Slovenia, already enforcing their own internal controls, Schengen could face erosion from within. European Parliament Deputy Vice President Katarina Barley says Poland's moves are in response to Germany's actions, and she also warns of a domino effect if every country starts picking and choosing when Schengen applies. She says they're not far off from the collapse of free movement in Europe. As migration, security, and domestic politics collide, the EU no doubt faces a test of one of its most cherished achievements, open borders. That is your update on this day from Europe. From strategic ports bracing for conflict to economic headwinds across the Atlantic and border controls threatening European unity, these are times of tension, transition, and transformation. I'm Anita Sharma for A News. Let's send it back to Baku.
In Armenia's parliament after opposition MP Artur Sargsyan, who is facing the loss of his immunity and possible arrest, claimed that a decision on his case had already been made. He said he planned to spend time with his family before being detained. As he left the podium, a heated exchange with ruling party members quickly escalated into a physical altercation. Lawmakers were seen pushing, hitting and throwing objects at each other. This is not the first incident in the chamber. In Georgia, tensions are rising ahead of local elections. The Speaker of Parliament is accusing EU-funded NGOs of interference, while other officials are trying to reassure international partners. Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
Organizations funded by the EU embassy are preparing to disrupt Georgia's local elections. This is the fact. With this direct accusation, the Speaker of Parliament, Shala Papashvili, sent shockwaves through the political landscape. According to him, the EU ambassador is sanctioning funding of groups that are allegedly working to undermine Georgia's electoral process. Papashvili says that the full responsibility will lie with the donors and vows that the ruling party will publicly name and expose both organizations and funders if necessary. His words: let's not let the Brussels bureaucracy destroy the EU's reputation. But just hours later, a very different message came from another corner of the government. The first Deputy Foreign Minister, George Zurabashvili, and the head of Anti-Corruption Bureau, President Kokashvili, met with foreign diplomats to ensure them that the controversial FARA and grants law pose no direct threat to NGOs' activities. They say that the new regulations aim to enhance transparency and are based on democratic standards. Kokashvili was clear: there are no circumstances today that threaten NGO activity. He also emphasized ongoing dialogue with international partners, describing the meeting as the open, detailed and constructive. So while the top officials accuse the EU funding organizations of plotting to interfere the elections, others insist that the communication and cooperation with the international community remains solid and lawful NGO activity is not at risk. This is Nini Nikolashvili reporting from Tbilisi, A News.
President of Kyrgyzstan Sadir Japarov arrived in Dushanbe for an official visit where he met with President of Tajikistan Emomali Rahmon to discuss strengthening bilateral cooperation. The talks focused on social infrastructure, multilateral coordination and border community issues. Rahmon praised progress on border delimitation and growing trade and security ties. Japarov thanked Tajikistan for its hospitality and stressed the importance of the border agreement for regional stability. China remains the largest investor in Tajikistan's economy. Over the past 18 years, Beijing has invested more than $5 billion in the Central Asian Republic. These figures were announced in Dushanbe during a session of the country's lower house of parliament. Our correspondent Farza Kalimoziner has the details.
Since 2007, Chinese investments in Tajikistan have totaled more than $5.1 billion, according to Sultan Rahim Zoda, chairman of the State Committee on Investments and State Property Management. He made the announcement during a session of Tajikistan's parliament. On the same day, lawmakers ratified a bilateral agreement between Tajikistan and China on the mutual protection and promotion of investments. The agreement was signed last year during Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Dushanbe and provides legal safeguards for investors from both countries. Of the total Chinese investment, $2.9 billion came in the form of direct investments, while the remaining $2.2 billion were other types of capital inflows. Rahimzadeh highlighted key sectors of Chinese involvement, including mining and processing industries, geological exploration, telecommunications, construction and equipment supply. Currently, more than 700 enterprises in Tajikistan operate with Chinese capital. China also leads in Tajikistan's natural resource extraction. According to official data, 84% of the country's gold production comes from 2 Chinese companies. Meanwhile, Tajikistan's sovereign debt to China is estimated at approximately $900 million. China became Tajikistan's largest foreign investor in 2014, overtaking Russia. The decline in Russian investment continued last year, while the United Kingdom rose to 3rd place among top foreign investors. And today, Tajikistan's main international investment partners are China, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Kazakhstan. Fariza Kalimurzana, A News, in Almaty, Kazakhstan.
The World Food Programme has warned that 10 million Afghans face hunger this summer, but only a fraction can get help due to funding cuts. Afghanistan's government is calling for sanctions to be lifted and for greater investment to support long-term recovery. Tamim Bahis reports from Kabul.
The World Food Programme has issued a stark warning about the deepening humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. According to the agency, 10 million people across the country are facing hunger this summer. But due to a severe lack of funding, only 1 million of them can be reached with food assistance. This alarming shortfall comes as Afghanistan tops the list of countries facing urgent humanitarian concerns. Despite the growing needs, international aid has been significantly reduced. As a result, millions of families are struggling with food shortages, unemployment, and rising poverty. The Ministry of Economy says it has launched new programs aimed at tackling poverty and unemployment. Officials believe that long-term solutions lie in economic recovery, not just emergency aid. They are calling for the lifting of sanctions and more international investment in projects that create jobs and increase families' ability to provide for themselves. Key drivers of the crisis include widespread unemployment, reduced foreign assistance, recent natural disasters, and limited access to health and education services. These issues have not only worsened hunger, but have also forced many families to flee their homes and send their children into hard labor. As the crisis unfolds, Afghan families continue to wait for sustained international support and real steps toward recovery. Tamim Bahis reporting for A News in Kabul, Afghanistan.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.